Right then, work on the Mark 1 shell is complete. All the doors, boot and bonnet are refitted, and locks and latches and seals, so Gavin Pink at the paint shop can correctly set all the door gaps and the shell profiles, etc. I've just fitted some stock axles and wheels on it, which are literally just for getting it on the trailer. There's no point in getting overspray over any of my nice new stuff, so that'll be on the trailer hopefully the start of September, which means now it's time to deal with the engine. So the engine, as you can see, it's a Sierra Cosworth 16 valve turbo, 2-wheel drive sump modified to fit the Escort. It looks lovely and pretty now that it's back from Barum Engines, having been rebuilt. It didn't always look as pretty, so I'll give you some history on the engine. Back in 2018, the shell was sent off to SD Developments in Todmorden. The guys there were restoring the shell and making all the Group 4 modifications. I always intended to put a YB motor in the Escort, and one came up and it sounded too good to be true. And usually when things sound too good to be true, they are. So it was sold as a full package, lifted straight out of a Mark II Escort and ready to drop into another Mark 1 or Mark II Escort. Everything you need apparently. So a full Cosworth 16 valve turbo motor, complete with the inlet manifold and the injectors, plenum chamber throttle body, an L6 ECU from a Sapphire Cosworth. On the exhaust side was a 4x4 manifold and a T34 turbo which had been tweaked. There was the alternator and the water pump, a pair of engine mounts to suit a World Cup cross member for an Escort from Rick's Engineering. There was other ancillary items like a Group A coil and an amplifier and some other bits and bobs. It also came with 3 gearboxes, 2 of which were virtually complete and 1 needed some bits to complete it. So yeah, the gearboxes, like I say, there was 3. I picked the best one out of the 3 and built that one up. It also came with a hydraulic clutch conversion, which is ideal for fitting it into an Escort because you haven't got the great big throwout arm sticking out halfway up where the transmission tunnel is in the car. At the time, boxes are valued at about £1,000 each. That's what I was selling for a complete gearbox. One of them was missing the bell housing and the gear lever mechanism and the reverse light switch and a few other bits and bobs. The other one had the bell housing, had a gear lever, that was also missing the reverse light switch and a speedo drive. So I managed to flog them 2 for 1,600 quid, leaving me with 1 gearbox, value about £1,000, and the engine owed me 3,400. But it wasn't such a good deal. Inside, it was running these pistons, which are from JE Engineering in the States. They're a billet forged piston. They got a little part number on the bottom. And so I contacted JE. They told me they were 92mm pistons, which maximum oversize, and there's running 6.5 to 1 compression. You can see the massive bowls. So a very old school piston. They could also tell me that they made them for a place called Capricorn Engineering in London back in 2003. So these pistons were 15 years old and not 5 years old as I'd been told. The engine was running wire rings machined into a groove at the top of the block and a Victor Rhines Group A fibre head gasket. So so that was a problem, because 6.5 to 1 compression ratio and worn bores was not good. Unfortunately, it wasn't the only problem with the engine. Number 2 liner, or number 2 bore, had already been relinered with some spurious liner that wasn't a top hat liner. It had actually started to slip down the bore. Number 1 bore at the top, where the wire ring was machined into it, that had chipped, and that was waiting to let go. The bearing on number 1 big end is absolutely fucked, so that would have been ready to let go, with the disastrous consequences to the rod and probably the crank. I had a leaking inlet valve. No, I had a bent inlet valve. Sorry, and all the exhaust guides were worn oval, so that weren't very clever. The cylinder head, the cam carriers were all in the wrong place, and they'd all been tightened up, like really super tight. And I suspect this engine was a bit of a mongrel and sort of thrown together from parts in order to sell it. One of the things that leads me to believe that is the exhaust manifold was actually a T25 manifold off a small turbo Escort. Yes, it was running a T34, similar to the turbo on the big turbo Escort, so the hole in the manifold was bloody tiny compared to the hole in the turbo. So that, you know, there's no way that was running 350 brake with such a restrictive exhaust manifold. And I suspect it probably had some nice cams in it that were ripped out, and stock cams hurriedly put back in because they'd swapped the bearings and the seals over from camshaft to camshaft, and the seals weren't properly installed. Like I say, the cams were thrown in, and the buckets, the clamps were all in the wrong places. So yeah, bit of a disaster. There's a bright side. It comes with some trick bits on it, which I'll go into later. I'm splitting this engine build video into 2 because it's just too long for one long video. So the first half is when I decided to ship the engine off to Lee Marshall at Barum Engineering down in Barnstable. It was a 3-hour trip down the M5 for me and my mate Tim, who kindly took me down there. And I dropped the engine off to Lee for him to sort out all the bad things, and I'll hand over to him now. These are clips from his videos that he takes for his channel, Barum Engines, and he's kindly allowed me to show him on mine. So over to Lee.
We've got another engine coming, Cosworth, which we're going to be stripping. I'm sure you Cosworth guys are going to be really interested to see what's going on in there. We've got to put top hat liners, etc. in there. So the next thing is, Paul is just about to strip that lovely looking Cosworth engine and see what we got in there. It's an unknown. The customer did say to me that it needs liners. Why it needs liners at this stage, I don't know, but we will soon see. So let's get out there and see what Paul's finding as we go along. Right, so here's the lovely looking Cosworth, as good as it looks. We're not sure what it's like inside. First thing Paul's done obviously is take the rocker cover off.
I took in the...
What have we found so far, Paul?
Well, so this can cap was in the wrong, so it's number 6 in there.
Oh, great.
Number 1 should be there, number 6 should be there, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
7,
6,
8, 9. Right, okay.
These are fine, but they're not right for some reason.
Yeah.
So it's probably quite lucky the cam still turn, because sometimes you can get the caps wrong and they won't turn at all.
I was going to say, yeah.
So that's quite lucky. I did take these oil bungs out quickly.
Yeah.
And it's not amazing really.
Ah, lovely.
So they've probably not been out for a while.
Did you say that the cam caps were extra tight as well?
They were very tight. Yeah, they're meant to be like 15 Newton meters usually, and I had to get probably a little bit overkill, but still needed something like that to get them off. Which
you shouldn't do. You should be able to do that with a
should be off
little
the spanner
ratchet.
quite easily.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So that's not ideal.
So far, we've got gloop in the oil ways of the cylinder head.
Yeah.
A few of the caps are on the wrong way, and they are done way too tightly.
Yeah, if we'll take these caps off.
Take these caps off. Take the cams out.
Take the cams out. I think the head's been off before, isn't it? He's taken the head off the customer.
I think so, yeah. I don't know the full story of this now, but...
These head bolts were loose anyway, so...
Well, that is where we're going to leave it for today's video, Paul.
On the cliffhanger.
We're going to leave them on a cliffhanger. And leave it for the next video to see what we've got inside.
Tune in next time.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
So there we go, guys. Left you on a bit of a cliffhanger. Please join us on the next video to see what's in this Cosworth engine. Hope you've enjoyed today's video. Until then, have a great evening and we'll see you then. Cheers, guys. First things first, guys, we're going to head out into the workshop as promised in the last video, and we're going to crack on with stripping that Cosworth engine. So let's go and find what Paul's found so far. Right, so as you can see, the cylinder head is off the Cosworth and so is the sump. So Paul, well, any horrors so far?
No horrors yet, mate. I mean, it's all reasonably clean inside, actually.
We've got a G19 baffled sump kit, you can see there. Quite a nice bit of kit, that, actually.
A bit of a, like an old style head gasket.
Oh yeah, that's the old Group A gasket, as they call it. So that's the fibre type as opposed to the multi-layer shim.
Victor Rhines.
Yeah.
Head doesn't look too bad, actually. There's no...
It doesn't actually, no. It looks pretty good in respect to...
There's no detonation
yeah, the waterways all look good. Usually they suffer with really bad corrosion around these areas.
We've had some pretty bad ones, haven't we? So.
We've had some real bad ones. The gasket is starting to blow here. What we tend to look at, a lot of people are obsessed with the head gaskets, but what we look at is this clean line here where the gasket, the fire ring sits, and where it goes around here and goes a bit dull. That is where it's beginning to blow, or if not already blown. So you can see it's starting to go up the top there. Combustion chambers don't look too bad for a Cosworth. It looks a bit black, but that's just how they run, really. Yeah, so I think the next step with the cylinder head, Paul, we'll strip that, see what the guides are like, obviously measure the depth of the head, see how much has been took off in the past. We'll have that baffle out of there and see what crap's lying about. Obviously, they're a pretty good fit, these things, but they do hide sludge and crap behind there.
Yeah, that's fair.
So what we found in the underneath?
Nothing too bad. Obviously, apart from the block is dirty. I mean, that black is obviously just oil deposits over a long time.
That's right, yeah.
They're usually, when they're clean, like a nice grey colour, aren't they? So
yeah,
that needs a very intensive clean.
What do the bores look like before we get it stripped?
Bores?
Because I'm pretty sure the customer said on here, I know I did it, oh Christ. That is an old school piston, that. Oh, I remember now, he said that these are about 6.5 to 1 compression.
I must be pretty bad off boost then.
Yeah, so
like 1.2
that is mega old school. I don't ever remember seeing pistons like that in them. But
it's had a belt slippage at some point because you've got some grooves, the valves in here.
That's it. That's pretty standard stuff, that. It doesn't look, it's got the old rings type in. That's why it's using the Group A gasket. Back in the day, they would mill a groove in there and put these rings in, but we will get rid of those.
There's a little bit of a shadow in there. That bore, I don't know what, that's watermarks on that one.
Yeah, it does look a bit like watermarks, but I think first things first, we'll measure these bores once you've stripped it. Now, the customer did say, and it's not his fault because he doesn't even claim to be an engine builder, although he said he has built some engines. He did the usual. He said to me he wants liners in it, and I didn't say anything when he dropped it off, but he did say because you get the pistons at the top and you can rock them back and forth, and that is exactly, if you remember the video I did about a week or so back, going on about how pistons are not parallel, they're tapered up the top, so do not get them and rock them backwards and forwards. It tells you absolutely nothing. So whether that was the reason he thought we need liners, don't know, or whether it was to get rid of these rings, but we'll measure those, see what we got. He wants it 6 long studded, so we've got to do that anyway.
This must have been rebuilt a long time ago.
I think it has been, yeah. This here, I mean, they used to run them with the T4s, they'd run them down to like 7.2, but nothing like that. It must have been hell of a boost running through there.
That must have been horrendous for them.
And these days, it'd be absolutely horrendous to drive on the road.
When you come boost, that would have been like a rocket ship.
I was going to say, but before that, it'd be flat as a turd.
Like a 1.5 diesel, not a Peugeot ones. Right,
so we've got the Cosworth down to a bare block now, and just starting from the bottom here, we've noticed straight away that there's a liner been put into number 2. So that looks about 1.5 mil thick, which is sort of borderline on whether it's going to be okay. But it's either a top hat liner that they've sort of put in a bit too long, because it's sitting about 1.5 mil, 2 mil proud down the bottom. If it's a straight liner, I would not have fitted it just straight in the block like that. I would have put a step into the block and pushed the liner down to the step down the bottom. But if it is proud like that and it's a straight liner, then when we turn this block over, you should see that that liner has slipped. So on first inspection, all the mains housings look okay. So looking at the top of the block, we've obviously got the wire rings in the block face, which is old school, what they used to do when they run the fibre gaskets. So this wire sort of protrudes, getting on 1/2 mil, and that would dig into the fibre gasket and just create more of a seal. But this number 2, that is obviously the straight liner, I am right, it's not a top hat, and as you can see, or you can definitely feel it, that liner has slipped. So that has slipped down probably about 1/2 mil. So that is going to blow a gasket instantly, and you can see on this edge here, it's definitely been blowing. So that is certainly going to create an issue. Number 1 here, I think this is the main problem. It's been blowing the gasket quite bad here. Obviously we've took the wire ring out, but you can see where they've cut that wire groove, it has just chipped a big bit out the top of the liner. So these are all at 1 mil anyway, which is obviously maximum for the Cosworth size piston. So what we're going to do, I've ordered the ductile iron liners with the top hat flange, which will obviously, by the time we've cut the flange in, it will do away with these wire rings. We'll put those in, and then we'll bore that back to standard. And I've ordered a standard set of Marla original pistons, which I'll put my own pockets in. So that will be the block sorted. Obviously we're going to do the 6 long stud conversion, ordered the studs, so that'll be that done. Right guys, it's thumbnail and title time, and it's all to do with the findings in this Cosworth. It's to do with what we found on the crank and the bearings. Here we have a con rod, which we've obviously blasted up, and we have sized this one. This is a bearing. Now this was a bearing out of number 1 big end, and you can see that is down to the copper backing. Now bearing in mind that this engine has not done much work at all. When it was built we don't know, but it really hasn't done much work. That is number 1 bearing right down to the copper. Not only that, but if you put it in the housing, bear in mind these are meant to be a snug fit into either the rod or the cap. You see that there, look, that is a prick in a bucket, and it is hammered out. Now the very strange thing is that these rods weren't honed before. It was the standard finish on the rod housings, but they looked perfect, all of them. It hasn't got to the point where it's damaged the crank, because we've measured this, and this has been ground 0.25 on the mains and the big ends, and they measure perfect really. They're on bottom limit of the tolerance. You've got about 1/2 thou, 0.6 of a thou tolerance on the mains and the big ends, and this is on bottom limit, which is what we always try and give it anyway, because we like to run a bit of extra clearance on the Cossies. The reason for that is it's a wide journal, and we like to allow the oil to get out, otherwise the oil can heat up and create issues. Now, when you look at that bearing, you would think that either that is oil starvation or too much clearance, one or the other. But in fact, it's quite the opposite. And the reason for that is, although we're on bottom limit on the crankshaft, we measured these rods, and actually, here's us measuring a rod here. So if we just hold the con rod lightly in the aluminium jaws in this vise here, this is all torqued up to 45 foot-pounds. And now if we measure this con rod, so 0 is top limit, so that is at its what would be the slackest. So you've got 0.6 of a thou of tolerance on this size, and as you can see, we're a thou tight there, so that is probably 1/2 thou tighter than the bottom limit in one direction, and on the other direction you're sort of bit over bottom limit there, and there you're a thou tight. So this is probably one of the slacker con rods, but on the other con rods which Paul has sized, we're going down to 2, 2.5. So that is about a thou and a half over or tighter than bottom limit. So as you can see there, those rods were about half a thou tighter than bottom limit, up to about a thou and a half tight, and that is a standard set of rods untouched. So that's why I've said to you in previous videos that on a lot of stuff, especially these Cosworth, I never had a set of rods, whether they've been giving trouble or not, that measure what they should do. They're usually tight. So what we normally try and do is run the com rods on mid to top limit, the crank on bottom limit, and that gives us about 2.5 thou running clearance. It's just over a 2-inch journal on there, so 2.5 thou. You're on the slacker side of the correct side, but that is how we like to run these. That's how we find that they run right. So the moral of the story is, guys, the reason for this is it was too tight in areas, not so much in that thrust area there, but along here it was very tight. And on this number 1 rod, we were about a thou and a half tight from bottom limit, and it's probably just enough to either pinch the bearing or put extra heat into the bearing, or the oil can't escape quick enough. The oil heats up and just wears the bearing, and that is starting to hammer out. In not too long at all, that is going to have hammered the crank, knocked a big end out. You'll end up with a knocking noise, and it probably scrapped the crank. Bear in mind, these are about £1,000 to 1,500 quid now to buy second hand, plus a rod, so plus an engine build. So yeah, that's why I say, guys, it's absolute paramount importance, whether they look okay and whether they've been giving trouble. We always size the rods and give them the correct clearance. Moral of the story, guys, get all your rods checked and sized, no matter whether it's been giving issues. Another thing with these, because we are still, although we were only running about half a thou clearance on some of these rods, where it should be about 2 to 2.5, when you build it, you wouldn't notice that. It would still move, it would still turn, it would still feel okay, but under any sort of load, it's going to create trouble, and that's going to happen in the not too distant future. So yeah, bear that in mind, guys. But before we go any further, guys, you can see I've set the block up here, and I'm just boring it out for the liners. The liners have arrived now. They're the top hat ductile iron liners, but I have noticed something while I was editing this video, actually. If you look at the beginning of the video when we were going over the block and what we found, you notice this little section here wasn't chipped out at that time. Now, Paul said when he was pushing the pistons out from behind the block, he said this one seemed to be stuck. Now, I suspect, looking at that cast iron there where the chunks come out, it's all black, so I suspect it's been chipped for some time, because where it's black you can see the gas has been blowing behind there, and when Paul's tried to push it out, the rings got caught on it and it's just pushed that chip out, because that was definitely still there when he stripped it and we first inspected it. So that's what I suspect's happened, but obviously putting these liners in is going to get rid of that anyway, guys. But the guy specifically wanted the ductile iron liners anyway, and this liner here in number 2 had slipped. So yeah, before you started commenting, I just thought I would point that out myself, because I didn't really notice that to start with. And guys, it doesn't end there. We have yet another issue with the Cosworth engine. So here is the remainder of the liner that was in number 2 on this Cosworth block. These here are the wire rings, which have obviously peeled out when we've done the flange for the other liner. So the way we get these liners out is we bore them out. So we keep boring, and you get to about 10 or 15 thou less than what the overall diameter is, and eventually this thing just peels out. And as you can see, that is where it was fitted in the existing bore. Now, the problem we have. So we order our liners from Westwood Cylinder Liners, and they do a top hat ductile iron flange liner, and this is the liner in question. Now, Westwood have had these made in the ductile iron. They used to do a normal cast iron one, but they don't do it anymore. Now, as many of you all know, if you've ever ordered liners from Westwood or anywhere else, they do a sheet with their sort of on-the-shelf liners. Nothing matches up to this, unfortunately. Now, the problem we've got here is because someone has fitted a liner, and I've said to you that it is slipped slightly. By the time this is peeled out, we have measured the housing in the block without removing any more material, and unfortunately it measures about 4 thou over or bigger than the diameter of these liners. We obviously run about a 3 thou interference on these, so it's about 7 thou too big. Now that may be, it's very unlikely that this liner was about 4 thou bigger than this. This is a pretty standard metric diameter, to be honest with you. So my feeling is, one, that has either been bored slightly over, and what they've done is probably glued this in. They haven't got the correct interference, and that's why it's slipped. Or two, they've had this made, but I very much doubt they're going to have had a straight liner made. If you're going to get a liner made, you'd get one in top hat, surely. Anyway, that is the problem we've got, guys. It's not an issue. I've been in touch with Westwood, and we can get this liner made exactly the same as this, but I've asked them to do a 25 thou diameter bigger, so all the other dimensions are exactly the same, except this diameter here is 25 thou bigger. And then what I'll do is I've just bored out the block another 25 thou with the extra, obviously with the 3 thou interference. We'll get this made. The only issue with that is it's a 5 to 6 week waiting list, so we're going to be set back on this one, guys. We can get the block bored, the other 3 liners in, and I can get it machined for long studs. I've got plenty to do. We obviously go through the cylinder head, get that one complete. I've got to put the pockets in the pistons yet. We've got to polish the crankshaft to get that assembly balanced. But yeah, we're going to be sort of set back a good 4 weeks on this job, guys. So unfortunately, I've let the customer know he's okay with that. But yeah, unfortunately, bit of a setback. Well, there we go, guys. Bit of a Cosworth day today for all you Cosworth fanatics, and an informative one, so I hope you've learnt something by today's video. That's it for today. We will see you Monday. Have a great weekend. Cheers, guys. So we're boring our last bore now for the final liner in the Cosworth block, and if I just blow that, you can see there where that was our last cut. We've got to do the flange cut out now, but you can see where it's all been chipping away there, where it's sort of gone up to where that wire ring is. So that wire ring would have been sitting right there. So by the time we've done our top hat cut, that's going to take all that out, be absolutely cock on. Now, very annoyingly with this, today I'm hoping I can get the three liners in there, and then I can set it up to do the long stud in. We've got the 6 long studs on their way, so I can get that done. And as soon as that other liner, the bespoke liner, turns up in hopefully less than 5 weeks, we can just pop that in, get the block faced, get it bored, and that block is all done then. So yeah, let's get that top hat flange cut out done, guys, and I'll get it set up for the long studs. So just in the process of doing these 6 long stud machining, just about to do my first one here on this 200 block, and I thought it would be a good time to show you. Now I've took the 2 core plugs out the side here. Obviously it's got to all be cleaned up in there and blasted and what have you, but just thought I'd show you on this side here. So we've got the opposite side to the ore gallery. There is the ore gallery there that runs through the block on the opposite side. So this is the opposite side to the ore gallery. Obviously the side where you've got the ore gallery, we can't go any deeper than what we normally do, so that's 120 mil deep with the tapping drill, but we don't need to because there's no lugs down in the bottom of the water jacket. But what I mean by lugs is in here, so in there and in here you can see that where I put that dot from the drill, that centre joint, you can see that is a lug, and that lug is about 10 mil high. So basically, with the old style ARP studs that say Burton's sell, etc., if you do just 120 mil deep with the tapping drill, 10 mil of that, basically you've got about 20-25 mil of thread down there, and about half of that almost is in that lug. And what tended to happen over time is it can break the top off that lug, and then you're in trouble then, because then you've only got 10 mil of thread down the bottom and it's just not enough. So what we tend to do is go about 5 mil deeper down into the base of the block, and basically put the clearance drill about 5 mil deep down through that lug, and it just takes a lot of the load off the top of that lug and it doesn't break off. So we do that on that one. We don't need to do it in the centre because this is not a through hole, or it doesn't go into the water jacket, sorry. So it's just these two. So an extra 5 mil on the tapping drill, an extra 5 mil on the clearance drill, and an extra 5 mil on the tap. So you can see that little centre dot where it's going to go now. So I just start up the drill very slowly. Just there we go, guys. A bit of a hoover out. And that there now, you're not going to have any trouble with. Fingers crossed. Right, so this is the Cosworth assembly. He's balanced it. I think it's all pretty much in balance, mate. Is that right?
Yeah, so the crank, front pulley and flywheel are all balanced.
Yeah.
So you've just got to do that clutch cover.
Okay, so how much is this out at the minute, this clutch cover?
I think it's about 40.
Oh, it's about, yeah, so it's about 40. And going on the angle, you're looking at about 0. Usually if it's on 0 or 360, it will start hovering from one to the other, because obviously, but it's just slightly over that, so probably about 10. So Isaac's just going to show you how we get this back into balance.
So just stop that, take it round to the angle. You reckon it was on about 10? Or?
Yes, it's about 10, something like that.
Right.
So 10 on this, it goes round to 36, so obviously you just take a 0 off, so 1 on there would be 10 degrees.
Yeah. So then that, on this centre line, sort of this way,
yeah,
that's where you would, that's where you're actually looking for.
Okay.
So I just mark it there, you can bring it up.
So basically, when you set it here on the angle, you've got to remove material off this plane, that's right, isn't it? Or you can add material onto the other way, but obviously it's a lot easier to remove material if you can.
So then, once you're marked up and everything, you can basically just drill
a
hole. See if this drill's any good.
There's no set amount, is there, on this? It's just literally you sort of get to know the machine. And I've said to people before, it all depends on the diameter and the material or whatever you're taking it off. So if you're taking it off if you've got 40 out, say for instance on a clutch, which is a big diameter steel, you're going to take less material off, say if a front pulley was on 40, because it's a small diameter, it's cast iron, so you'd end up drilling a bigger hole in that. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much.
So let's drill a hole and see what difference it makes.
See if this drill's any good.
Basically, if we stuck an 8mm drill straight through the clutch cover here, and it goes down to 20, then you know roughly another 8mm hole should pretty much do it. But see what that takes it down to. So yeah, that's 25-ish, 30, so going by that, I reckon another 2 8mm holes and that should be pretty much there then.
Yeah.
Ideal. Right mate, how we got on?
Yeah, all balanced now, it's down to 0, so I'll show you that.
So there we go, the amount is 0. The angle gauge is flapping all over the shop, which means it don't know where it's out, which is a good thing.
Show the holes in the...
Yeah, show us the holes.
Got those 2 little divots there I had to do, and then just that little set of holes and divots.
So what tends to happen sometimes is, if you've got to remove quite a bit of material, it sometimes changes, doesn't it? It sort of moves over, so you end up drilling a couple over here. And
it's almost if you take a little bit too much in one spot, it will just shift round, and you know, you can sort it in another area.
Yeah. So that's all balanced now. Just waiting for that liner on the Cossie. But thank you very much, mate.
It's all right.
Right then. Thanks for the work so far, Lee. There's a bit of a natural break now while we wait for that bespoke liner to be made. So I'll cut the video here and we'll pick it up next time when the liner arrives.